Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's webinar, Learn How to Transform DLP with SDM 9.1. Slide. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. As part of our conversation on transforming data loss prevention with Sensitive Data Manager, we're going to be covering data discovery and classification techniques and then diving further into SDM Sensitive Data Manager. Finally, we're going to reserve a bit of time at the end to answer all of your questions. Really quickly, for those of you that are new or unfamiliar with Identity Finder, we have been in the sensitive data management business now for over 10 years. We have over 1,000 customers, largely focused in the enterprise space, along with the state, local education markets, and a number of customers in the higher education space. We're headquartered in Manhattan with offices all throughout the U.S. So here's just a sample of some of our customers. We obviously have quite a few more than this. As I mentioned, we have over 1,000 customers, but I wanted to share just a few of the brand names that have trusted Identity Finder to be their sensitive data management solution. Organizations such as Boeing, Intel, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Barnes & Noble, Harvard, Penn State, Cornell, from education to retail to state and local entities. We have been assisting just a handful of these organizations with this mission for a number of years now. So I'd like to introduce today's speakers. With me today is Todd Feynman. Todd brings over 10 years of experience at PwC as a practice manager, an ethical hacker, growing their security integration practice and implementing DLP solutions for their customers. He has over 20 years total experience in the security industry, is internationally published, along with a recently published book on data classification here as well. You can find him on the speaking tour and throughout many media publications.
Thanks very much, Gabe. And likewise, I'd like to introduce Gabriel Gums. He is our VP of Product Strategy and helps us innovate our product on a regular basis. He has 15 years of InfoSec experience. He's created the vision and strategy for multiple extremely large organizations and helped formulate their strategy and policies and procedures for some of the top security programs out there. He also is a published thought leadership expert and does the tour as well on the conference circuit.
Thanks, Todd.
So you got it, Gabe. And there is, I can tell based on the pauses that Gabe was giving, there's a little bit of a delay when we switch from slide to slide, so just we'll use that as our chance to pause. But there seems to be always a slight delay. And with that, I want to get right into the content. And that begins with really asking the general question of what is sensitive data. We can't define that for any of our customers or anyone who, excuse me, who comes to us asking about our product. That would be doing them a disservice. So we always like to preface with, what is it really that organizations need to protect? There's a mountain of data out there, but not all of it is sensitive. And it's really important that each organization go through the process. And technology really can't help with this, but defining what it is that's sensitive to your organization. If data was lost or stolen or exposed, could it cause financial harm to your organization or reputational damage, or be the reason you get terminated? If the answer is yes to any of those questions, that makes it sensitive data, and that's what differentiates it from all the other data that's out there. And the truth is, to protect all the data in your organization would cost an extremely large amount of money, and it would be extremely resource intensive. So it's always valuable for organizations to take that step back and say, before I even spend money on trying to build processes, hire people, or spend money implementing technologies, what is it I'm really trying to do? And really, outside the technology, if you think about the concept of sensitive data management and trying to prevent data loss, it is getting at the exact same answer of, where should you be doing all these things within the organization? Do you want to protect every single bit of data, or do you need to just focus on, hey, the social security numbers, the credit card numbers, or some other form of intellectual property? You know, some of you have seen Gabe and I speak in the past, and you're familiar with our Ashley Madison example. I'm going to speed through this to get to the new content, but we put this up because at Ashley Madison, every piece of information is extremely critical to them. And as we could see where, a customer like a Barnes & Noble might not care, sorry, a customer to us, but Barnes & Noble might not care about if, they lose a customer list because, let's face it, all of us have probably bought a book at Barnes & Noble at some point in time. However, at Ashley Madison, every single piece of information about a customer is extremely sensitive because no one wants other people to know that they were a customer of Ashley Madison. So for them, the definition of sensitive data is customer information or a customer name. It doesn't even have to get to the level of being a credit card number. Now, let's take a completely different example where, we've talked about this in the past as well, and it's just starting to become dated, but there's a really, really important lesson to be learned from the North Korea attack on Sony. A few months ago, Identity Finder was actually subpoenaed in a class action lawsuit to help, as the organization, define exactly how much sensitive data was leaked. So our software was used to figure out what the discovery analysis yielded. And what's interesting is, and I won't speak on behalf of Sony, but I will say that they probably looked at things like the unreleased movies as some of the most sensitive things within their organization. Because again, if a movie winds up on the internet before it's even released to theaters, especially in DVD quality, they're going to clearly lose money. They might not lose reputation, but they definitely will lose money. Less people will likely see it in the theater. Turns out, though, in the process of North Korea trying to find some of those unreleased movies, specifically the movie entitled The Interview, they wound up stealing a lot of other data. And that's because there was a very large footprint of other sensitive information. And this, again, is a very good lesson learned for all other companies. When you're defining what sensitive information is for you, it's critical that that definition be broad enough to encompass anything that could, again, cause reputational damage, productivity inhibitions within the company, and of course financial loss and compliance issues. So what we wound up seeing was that 601 Excel spreadsheets contained duplicative information around sensitive information, specifically employees' social security numbers, personal addresses, and a ton of other information. And one of the big lessons learned here is how big of a sensitive data footprint do you want to have? What is too large of a sensitive data footprint? Should 601 copies of data exist? Now, maybe the answer is yes. Maybe you have 601 different employees who all need to access the information. Maybe not all of it was replicated across every single file, but the point is, should all your SSNs be spread across all these files, or should they be in one central repository that is highly encrypted and requires a lot more access in order to be able to get through it, especially in the event where we live in an age, it's not a matter of if you're going to be attacked, it's a matter of when. And it's important that you realize the smaller a target you have, the less likelihood there will be that you have that reputational damage, an issue with compliance, or other financial damage from a breach.
So you mentioned compliance, and I want to jump in there and add a couple of things. So both the FTC guidelines and the General Data Protection Regulation, the EU General Data Protection Regulation, explicitly have language that speaks to the reduction of sensitive data. They talk explicitly about removing, maintaining, and protecting all of these copies of information, of sensitive information. If I go back, well, don't go back, but if I touch on the slide before where you mentioned, to some organizations, the thing that is sensitive is simply names, right? Simply customers that are using the service. The General Data Protection Regulation their regulation is quite that broad, whereby they state that any identifier of an EU citizen that is either being held by an entity that does business in the EU, whether or not they have physical servers there or not is irrelevant, even if you're a third-party data handler, so you could be handling data on behalf of another organization. But their regulation, it broadly states that any identifier at all, and goes all the way down to digital identifiers as well. It's one of the reasons why having multiple copies of sensitive information increases that overall threat to the data assets.
Excellent.
So kind of continuing that same thread, I had to pull this one out just because it was such an awesome interview, and I suggest anyone who hasn't done so that you should certainly check it out. So Michael Linton, the CEO of Sony, did an interview with Harvard Business Review, and I'm just going to read part of it verbatim because I don't think I could have said it any better myself. But he says, a lot of it, as you mentioned, comes down to what you put on your network. My wife made it obvious to me at one point when she reminded me that she keeps her jewelry in a safety deposit box and takes it out only when she plans to wear it over the weekend. But what that basically means is if someone broke into their home, someone would not be able to steal that asset because the asset footprint only exists in a single small place and it's locked down.
Sorry about that. You wanted the next slide. There you go.
There you go. Oh. So when we talk about making that case for shrinking the footprint, there are a number of other things that come into play. Insurance rates rising after high-profile breaches has been in the news quite frequently. We continue to see as cyber insurance policies have been written that there's a bit of fine print that gets overlooked by someone they're purchasing insurance regarding their overall coverage and the rates. But more importantly, in the not so fine print, we've also seen a number of insurers explicitly asking the insuree, that is, to be able to identify what the assets are that they're protecting. Some of those regulations have gone as far as to explicitly ask to detail the number of copies of certain types of records and so on. So, for example, if you are in the retail business and your PCI information, your customer data, those types of things are all important and would pose a threat if otherwise mishandled, exfiltrated, or lost through a hack. The insurance companies are explicitly asking you to tell them, okay, well, how many of those data asset types do you have? Can you tell me what it is you're looking to protect so that we can better scale that insurance instrument to your needs? And then, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'll go ahead. Sorry about that.
I was just going to mention insurance not being a complete solution to the data threat problem either. So in the Target example, that cost the company a total of $264 million, and way less than half of that, only about $90 million of that, was even recouped from insurance payouts.
This is definitely one of the biggest issues that there's uncertainty around. A lot of companies we've heard say things like, our cybersecurity strategy is essentially to have an extremely high insurance deductible, and a low deductible, but a very large premium to pay for a maximum amount of damages. And they rely on this as a strategy if something goes wrong because they think the likelihood is so low. That has shifted a lot over the last year or so as we've seen, first of all, a lot more litigation. Second of all, insurance companies starting to change their strategy and realizing that this is what organizations are doing to try and game the system. So it's important to sort of think about this in the context of what could happen and what strategy might work for you, and really what your insurance company is willing to work with you on. But realize that a lot of the companies that have had those big payouts, their premiums have skyrocketed, and now the insurance companies have basically said, look, we're not going to insure you up to that amount anymore because you're very high risk. So there's long-term damage as well to that kind of strategy. And to sort of like put a finer sort of point on this, there's a lot of questions around the visibility of data. Some organizations don't know exactly what the footprint of their sensitive information is. And again, today we're going to talk to you a little bit about the product and a lot about the processes and other technologies that can help with this, because at the end of the day, classifying your data will help a lot. But it's important to understand why you would do this. A lot of organizations will say, you know, am I classifying my data for classification's sake? No, you're not. You're doing it to gain a better understanding of that data. And there's no better example of this in recent times than with Jeb Bush. Now we can say former Republican presidential candidate, but this is a great story to sort of show another lesson learned. Here we see he received an email that actually had probably like 44 other people CC'd on it, where he received a spreadsheet, a PowerPoint presentation containing what looks like an Excel chart, and you can see that on the bottom right. And by the way, that's it. There's only one slide to this. You can actually see on the very bottom left of that screenshot, slide 1 of 1. So you'd think this is very innocuous. Unfortunately, when you double-click on that Excel picture, you get access to the entire Excel spreadsheet that was used to create it. That's the way object linking and embedding works. That's how PowerPoint and Excel do their things. And what wound up happening here was that spreadsheet contained 12,564 names, social security numbers, and dates of birth. And the reason we point this out as another example and lesson learned is that it's very important that organizations understand you probably can't do this manually. There's just no way to expect that your employees can understand every single bit of data in every single file that not only they create, but that they receive. And in this particular case, there were 5 other emails that contained the spreadsheet because nobody knew that it contained all these social security numbers. So the problem became so pervasive, and these SSNs spread so far. As I said at the beginning, 44 other people were CC'd on this. We don't even know, because the other 44 people didn't post all their emails in the interest of running for Republican presidency candidate. We don't know what these other 44 people did with it. You know, how many copies of their emails exist? How many people detached it and did something else with it? And this permanently exposes 12,000 plus people to the risks of identity fraud. And that's because social security numbers don't expire.
That's a good point. So I mentioned a little earlier about some of the regulations, and right before we get into to the solution itself, wanted to touch on just this final point. Again, going over some of the impacts and ramifications. So the FTC has gained complete precedent for their ability to enforce these types of data regulations. Ultimately, the way and the reason why they're involved is organizations have statements stating that they will protect the privacy of individuals and so on, and by not adequately protecting those data assets, the personal information of customers, their financial information, whatever the case may be, they are explicitly breaking that rule, if you would, allowing the FTC to step in and say, hey, you know, you promised that you were going to do this, and as a consumer protection mechanism, you know, we have to step in and take action here. And in the last 12 months, they've levied well over $30–40 million in fines, and in some cases, they have even, I think there's 2 recent examples where they will now be monitoring the security practices of 2 organizations for the next 10 years. So if having a fine levied isn't bad enough, they will now have the FTC reviewing their security practices for the next decade. That to me signals a very strong shift in the way regulatory agencies are viewing the importance of sensitive data protection.
Every time I hear it, I cringe. So,
Yeah.
you know, what's been the solution to this? Well, you know, 10, 15 years ago, DLP became all the buzz. And organizations thought, okay, I just have to protect this data from leaving my organization. The mentality has shifted significantly. And that's not just because the perimeters become more porous, but of course it has. The cloud, people working from home, third parties have access to each other's networks in some form or another. And employees have a lot more access to data. And let's face it, no one deletes anything anymore. So it's a very pervasive problem that is clearly going to get much worse, not better. but there are solutions to the problem. And classification is something that organizations have talked about for a long time, but recently there's been more technologies that have come onto the market to help with this. And this is absolutely what Sensitive Data Manager helps with. But before we talk about the product specifically, let's talk about the concept of it. How does classification address this challenge? Why isn't DLP the solution? Well, understanding what the data is, giving it that identity so that people understand, oh, I'm interacting with a PowerPoint file that contains all those social security numbers, that helps create that awareness. Where the data is and how big of a footprint that is helps control the risk and understand the risk. How big of a problem do you have? Do you have 3 million credit card numbers or medical records or social security numbers or pieces of intellectual property, or do you have 30,000? And that helps you define what that cybersecurity budget is going to be to protect that data. Data classification gives data that identity. It embeds in the metadata of the files the information, and allows you as an organization to have reporting capability across all that data to understand how big of a footprint that is, who's accessing it, and whether or not you even need that large of a footprint of data. So the life cycle of data classification, regardless of whose technology you use, is around knowing your data and persistently identifying the most important data, the sensitive data within your organization, essentially in a real-time basis, and understanding it on an ongoing basis, so that people who are accessing it understand what they're doing. That first person who forwarded that spreadsheet to Jeb Bush and CC'd 44 other people likely wouldn't have created what I can only hypothesize and theorize is likely hundreds, possibly thousands of copies of those social security numbers. If when they were dragging and dropping that file into the Outlook message and then clicking send, something told them this PowerPoint presentation contains 12,000 social security numbers. Sony, if those employees realized that they had the 601 different spreadsheets containing 1.1 million copies of those social security numbers, they likely wouldn't have been doing those things. So the know your data, it's not just the first step, it's the most important step. Setting policies, I already talked about the persistently identifying, setting the policies to enforce and monitor, right? You want to know if more data is being created, you want to know who's accessing it, you want to know how old it is, right? We don't need, I mentioned earlier, people never delete anything anymore. That's not necessarily the right thing. At a minimum, at least get into a habit of encrypting data that you're not using, and then if you have to go back and reach out to an archive, then at least there's additional controls in place where additional sensitive information exists. Protect that data by building bridges instead of walls. You're never going to be able to just force that data into a box, right? People are going to put it in the cloud. They're going to email it to themselves so they can access it and work on it from home. They're going to share it with other people. The most important thing to do is make that awareness available to them so that they understand what they're doing, and then put better security controls in place, right? At the end of the day, there will be this means to an end, there is an end, and the end is about protecting that data better. So do you need encrypted communication through email? Do you need to make sure that you're using a cloud provider who provides 256-bit AES encryption? Do you need DLP, something that blocks an email from going outside your organization? And then, of course, creating that culture of good behavior, right? We want employees to ultimately stop thinking it's okay to have SSNs, credit card numbers, intellectual property, right? I don't think there's actually a guy who knows the Coca-Cola formula, but if there was that guy, right, we've all heard about this, right? The secret formula to Coke, you don't want that sitting on certain people's desktops or being used inappropriately. So from an intellectual property perspective, you want that good behavior of people saying, I'm aware that this could create a financial problem for my company. I need to be very diligent about not making this more pervasive and spreading it around my company.
What Todd just articulated there is the practice of basically operationalizing that policy that you already have right now that basically says something to the effect of, these types of documents should only be handled by these persons, or they shouldn't be emailed to those persons, or things of that nature. Most of the customers that we work with already either have such policies written, or they're in the process of creating them, and really operationalizing those processes, putting them into play, is where the rubber meets the road. And a number of the analysts in the industry have commented on this, and I want to take Anton's quote. He actually made this almost a year ago at this point, but ultimately he said that DLP implementations that are followed still by data loss and subsequently also followed by the use of other security controls, it's an issue that can be avoided. He's saying what we've all known. We've invested a lot of resources, both in the way of people and money, in these traditional DLP implementations, only to still be followed by all these data loss incidents. And what he says is that accurately identifying data that should not transit egress points, the key is to first identify and classify that data. It seems so it seems so almost, just self-evident that in order for me to be able to make a determination on what is allowed to go or not go, what should be handled, not handled, and how it should be handled, what security controls I apply to them, first I need to identify, okay, what is that data asset that I'm looking to apply these security controls to? And so what we're going to get into is how we go ahead and turn that inside out and identify those data assets so that we can apply the proper security controls.
Excellent. I'm going to be jumping into the product, and I wanted to give a preface to that of, reducing that risk of classified exposure means integrating not just with, the organization's employees and having an awareness of the data, but also those security prevention technologies. And this is a multi-step process. We talked about that, knowing what to secure and what can be public. That's critical because you can't boil the ocean, right? You can't possibly protect every file in your organization. Maybe that's your goal, and there's nothing wrong with that, because again, we use the example with Ashley Madison. We can't tell you what you should protect and not protect, but boiling the ocean is extremely difficult. And there isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all strategy. Everybody's going to do something differently. So again, data in motion products, right, the DLP products, those might be part of your strategy. Identity and access management might be. Having cloud might be something your organization does. You might be completely against the cloud. No employees are ever allowed to post data there. And minimizing that volume of sensitive data by not having it in the cloud, that could be part of the strategy. The most important thing what we're trying to say before we get into the technology is you will be defining your own ecosystem of protection. You will figure out, are you going to use encryption everywhere? Are you going to disallow the cloud? Are you going to have DLP? The nice thing about classifying your data is once you know what's sensitive and what isn't, you can make these decisions much better. And ultimately, it might actually help you even reduce how much money you are spending on cybersecurity. At the very least, it will absolutely help you prioritize your spend and know where you should be spending it, even if it's not a lesser amount of money. So most customers use, our pre-sensitive data management products, right? The identity finder for the existing customers on this webinar who have been with us for like 10 years. We've had a whole bunch of names, but the idea of that product before it did classification was you basically see the two screens in front of you. And these screens essentially help you with discovery. They help you identify your footprint. They help you measure how much data you have. They help you get awareness. The screen on the left is typically the one used from a centralized perspective. Managers, administrators, they look at this screen, they use the dashboard, they run reports, they figure out what's going on in the organization. The one on the right could also be used by them, could also be used by employees, so that employees gain that good behavior and awareness of what they're doing. So we have a console and we have the client, and some combination or hybrid approach of the two helps customers really identify and discover sensitive information no matter where it exists in the company: emails, the cloud, files, databases, websites, what have you. And that was it. So people would gain knowledge. Now, the next step was people would create these policies, administrators would create these policies, and you could even monitor that data on an ongoing basis, so that as data is, you will know and be able to create awareness that that file might contain the embedded Excel spreadsheet that contains intellectual property or credit card numbers or medical records or what have you. So that was it, and it helped create awareness, and it helped measure, and it helped people make decisions. But at the end of the day, we always knew it was missing something that we thought would be great to be able to innovate into the product. And thankfully, over time, and thanks to a lot of customer feedback, we were able to come up with a method for classifying information and classifying files so that the metadata itself would persistently stay with the file and then be able to be used by other technologies to decide what should happen. So what you see here is a much different type of interface. This is just Windows Explorer. Instead of having to load up our interfaces and learn about your data, the idea is this is all happening behind the scenes. Sensitive Data Watcher monitors whatever folders or hard or entire file systems for new data, and as it gets created or modified, automatically behind the scenes, the Sensitive Data Management Engine figures out if there is sensitive data in the file, and then it automatically applies classifications based on your definitions to that. So if it has a credit card number in it, maybe it gets classified as sensitive PCI data. If it has the Coca-Cola formula, maybe it gets classified as intellectual property. And you define all those thresholds and all that. And the idea is this is transforming the organization from having to use another tool to perform information about their cybersecurity strategy or execute on a security strategy into something that basically is just constantly protecting the organization and providing that knowledge. One of the things we introduced in Sensitive Data Manager 9.0 isn't just all the classification capabilities and some of the new enhancements, but also Sensitive Data Engine.
Right. So you keep mentioning that Coca-Cola recipe, and I got to tell you, could you imagine if that actually got out? I mean, just how devastating that would be. But let's take it back for a second. So, you know, we talk about locating credit cards and locating personally identified information such as social security numbers, driver's licenses, and so on. And that's a core functionality of our AnyFind technology, right? So AnyFind allows us to narrow the likelihood of a positive match, and it also eliminates false positives through a series of validations. So after years of refining and improving upon that solution, we derived this sensitive data engine because looking for proprietary institutional data, that gets a little trickier. That is the type of information that's otherwise only recognizable by the organization that created it. And so the sensitive data engine allows end users to locate that type of sensitive data. And that's accomplished by building these definitions. You can think of it as a sort of intelligent search grammar that allows you to define the criteria to identify that institutionally unique sensitive data. So through a series of logic statements along with the AnyFind, the proprietary AnyFind algorithms and validations, we can really now start to hone in and look for, again, what was the original goal of DLP in general, right? Looking to stop these proprietary types of information from leaving the organization, as well as the PII and SSNs and all those things that we mentioned.
It's always hard to get me to shut up when we start talking about products. So, Gabe, I'm going to jump in before I flip to the next slide and just say that, you know, when we started the company in 2006, we had a vision for helping companies do this as easy, as accurate, and as fast as possible. And we always wanted to be able to give people the power to do that for things we couldn't invent search algorithms for. So social security numbers are a standard data type. Anybody can find a 9-digit number, but we were the ones who came up with all the validation algorithms and figured out a way to reduce that accuracy, reduce that false positive overload and increase that accuracy to be as highly precise as possible. But what we've recently done is, and we call that our secret sauce, what we've recently done is we've essentially exposed a lot of that secret sauce in this sensitive data engine so that the same methodologies we use to say what makes a credit card number beyond the Loon algorithm, right? Anyone can do the Loon algorithm, but we have dozens of other validators. Now what we've done is we've taken that and we've built this open architecture to allow other people to define anything that they would want to deem sensitive. And we get asked a lot, so can I just upload 100 documents to Sensitive Data Engine and it'll figure out what I want to look for? And the answer is no, of course not. That we are not trying to sell magic. And, you know, that type of document sort of learning technology might not be magic for you. You might have a perfectly consistent, homogeneous set of 100 documents and it might work. But for most organizations, it doesn't work, and it hasn't worked. And it's, you know, companies have had technology like that for the last 10 years, and it is rife with false positives. What we're trying to do is say, what is it in those 100 documents that would make you say it is intellectual property? So if you can define that in words, you can use Sensitive Data Engine to find that specific information. Maybe it has your copyright information. Maybe it has a keyword about a piece of confidential information. Maybe it has something from a customer list. Maybe it has a algorithm in it. Maybe it has a parity check because it is something like a customer account number that you can validate on your own. Maybe it needs to be within a certain number of characters or something. But the point, maybe certain people have access. The point is there's so much power with the Sensitive Data Engine that it does allow you to define what is intellectual property to you, just the way we've defined what should be a social security number to anyone, or a credit card number, or a password, or a bank account number, or one of those other things that is more of a standard data type. And this really is a massive differentiator for us because it allows you to search through unstructured data in a way that you've never been able to before. Structured data like a database, listen, that's if you have a good database and your tables are set properly with the right columns and all that, you should know what's sensitive in there. Doesn't mean you can't use this technology to search it as a double check, but the real strength of this is to help with all that unstructured data, the millions of files that you have within your organization. Gabe, I'll turn it back over to you, and you can talk about Sensitive Data Watcher briefly.
So that's a perfect place to turn back over, actually. So you talk about those millions of files in place. So typically when we set out on a project to help someone, there are kind of two paths we go down. There is all of that data that already exists in their environment, the thousands, the millions of structured and unstructured documents already in their environments. And then there's all of the data that's being created on a daily basis. So all of the things that Todd just talked about, the ability to search, discover, classify, protect all of the information that's already within the environment, those are things that any fine and Sensitive Data Engine and SDM in general tackle at that level. As part of the process for identifying everything we just talked about, but doing so as it happens in real time, that's where Sensitive Data Watcher comes into play. So Watcher looks at an environment and it basically looks for any of those identifiers that we just talked about, including the ones that you can build with Sensitive Data Engine. And it will then execute the responses, the policies that you've defined. So to give you an example of how that works, let's say you have that Coca-Cola secret sauce, and that should only be allowed to be handled by certain types of engineers in the Coca-Cola secret sauce department, if you would. Sensitive Data Watcher can identify when files are either created, and by created, that could simply be someone copied it from a shared location and saved it to their local desktop. So now there's a new file in that environment, and it'll recognize that sensitive information there and take an action based on that. You can define those actions. You can delete that information. You can quarantine that file. You can redact it. You can take a number of different actions on it. You can take a custom action on it, so you can execute an external script or external executable against that file. And Sensitive Data Watcher performs all this in real time as information is being created, copied, handled. So when Todd alluded earlier to the inability to scale your data protections in a manual fashion, this is why, right? You can't train all of the data handlers, consumers, producers within your environment to execute the security policies that you've written down on paper, and expecting that to happen with every single file document within their working environment throughout the course of their day. And you certainly can't expect that to happen without interrupting normal business activity. excuse me. And so this is where Sensitive Data Watcher really comes into play again. Let's take another very common example where data from a central source of record is, and the Jeb Bush example was a good one, but let's say we have our HR database, and I need to create a report so that I can report on a number of new employees being onboarded and employees moving on to other opportunities and things of that nature. And I take that information out of my central repository and I start creating a spreadsheet. So now I have this Excel spreadsheet that now has PII inside of it. I may have already protected with some other security control, maybe some other DLP control, all of the information in that HR database. But now as new documents are being created, as data handlers are going about their tasks, I now have this other copy of information that needs to be protected, and I need to have those same protection mechanisms that I outlined for my HR database applied to this file. That's where Sensitive Data Watcher comes in. That's the power of being able to apply those discovery, classification, and security controls in real time.
And the other thing that's very nice about this is it moves you away from having to schedule searches and make this a process that has some sort of manual kickoff, whether you schedule the manual kickoff or you are manually doing it on demand. This now is just something that resides in the background, and it's constantly there to help you. It is not something that you need to proactively do. You don't need to say, yep, I'm going to go and search the server. It's just there, and it's helping, and it's real time. And that's really the big advantage that allowed us to move towards classification, because now if a file is created that is classified, or I should say that has sensitive data, it will now be automatically classified, and the metadata will be changed so that if somebody tries to move that outside the organization, maybe your DLP system will block it, or maybe your encryption product will encrypt it, or what have you. Me or you, Gabe? I forgot.
I'll start in.
Okay.
The real power again of Sensitive Data Manager comes in the ability to identify that sensitive information, apply those classifications to it, and then the protection mechanisms. The way we've extended that out further so that it becomes part of your people and your process is to embed these awareness components, so what I like to call the active awareness components, into the solution as well. So in the screen that Todd is showing here, you can see a Word document that has already been classified, and the classifications of those files are now being shown in the document. We've extended this functionality to all of the major collaboration and productivity suites, so Office, Acrobat, you name it, all of those things. So as users are working with the documents, they have this active awareness component whereby they can see what type of classification the file already has and understand that it should be handled in a certain manner. And again, with the product like Sensitive Data Watcher, they may not necessarily even have to understand that, you know, I shouldn't save this to the cloud. It'll go ahead and already take that action for it. So extending on that idea, users also have the ability to add to that as well. So you can see there are multiple classifications listed here. There's high and there's elevated. So a user has the ability, and it's kind of in the top right below where it says review. They can now also add classifications to documents themselves as well. So let's say that there's an extended classification schema that also says that this file is you know, internal only, HR only, whatever it is. They can add and extend the classifications to that, allowing multiple security controls to take actions based on the classification of it. What's not also shown here, but we should definitely talk about while talking about the embedded awareness, is the icon overlays that Todd showed a few screens ago. These same classifications are reflected throughout the operating system environment so that end users always understand what it is they're interacting with. You can avoid the Jeb Bush type mistakes whereby someone didn't know that PowerPoint had 40,000+ social security numbers embedded within.
Yeah, and what's beautiful is you combine these two concepts together, the Sensitive Data Watcher for the real-time monitoring and this classification technology, and now you can narrow your window of risk or potentially even eliminate that window of risk. So we talked about Sensitive Data Watcher, where maybe you search every week, maybe you search every night, maybe you search every month or quarterly or annually, who knows. But the point is, you're probably not searching every 1 second. And the idea with Sensitive Data Watcher is now you've reduced that window of risk from, let's say it was daily, that would be 23 hours and 59 minutes, to literally instantaneously. So you could have had someone create a file 1 minute after the search completed, and now until the next search runs, no one's going to know about it. Thanks to Sensitive Data Watcher, you'll know about it instantaneously. So SDM eliminates that window of risk, and the beautiful thing about classification is now if you have automated the process of using your discovery results to classify files based on what you deem to be a piece of PCI data or medical information or personal information or intellectual property. Now, one minute after that search completes, if a new piece of data is created and then someone tries to email it outside the organization, it is going to be blocked because it's classified, and the metadata will tell your DLP product, for example, if you're using McAfee host DLP, that you cannot copy this to a USB drive or email it outside the organization or what have you. And I'll get into those examples a little bit more. So that's essentially the sensitive data management vision. It's our vision, the identity finder vision, whatever you want to call it. But the idea here is you're taking all these components, discovery, classification, monitoring, and of course protection, to automate this process and persistently classify your data so that within files metadata, those attributes tell other products within your organization, don't let me leave the organization, don't let me be unencrypted, don't let this user access me. Giving that data that sort of identity and that instruction manual not to do things is how you're going to ultimately prevent data loss on a more consistent and ongoing basis. You're not going to be relying on pattern recognition that are rife to false positives. You're not going to be relying on employees manually having to classify something. You're going to have an engine that you might tweak, you might not tweak, but over time you will gain great comfort in knowing it gives you the confidence in saying, yes, we can do this. We can prevent data loss, or at least minimize the risks of data loss that we haven't minimized in the past. And there's a lot of details we can go into with you guys, and we are happy to do a more technical version of this webinar, but it's not just what we think your attributes need to be defined to include. It can be anything, and we have an extensive list of things that allow you to determine what is going to be the things that allow you to classify something. We've talked a lot about content because that's essentially what we're experts in, but you might decide that it's going to go beyond the content of what's in the file. It could include the created, modified, or last access time. It could create the access control list of permissions. It could be the location path. It could be the file type. It could be the IP address. It could be any of those things. We think, most importantly, it's going to have to do with something related to what the sensitive data types are in the content, because ultimately you want to know what's inside the document to classify it properly. However, it goes well beyond that, and you'll be able to have a lot of control over what you define as the workflow for classifying this data as, and the entire process will be automated. So I touched on this briefly, and I just want to touch back to it and say that we now work with third parties. We have this open architecture. We integrate with Windows Explorer. We showed you that screenshot earlier, meaning as soon as someone creates a file, they will see that overlay icon and know it won't conflict with your Dropbox icon or whatever other technology you use. You get to pick and choose where it goes and all that information. You'll get to pick whatever icons you want. We don't force anything on you, even though we have the built-in best practices to make your life easier. You have complete control and power over doing this. We also integrate with Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Access, and Outlook, Adobe Acrobat. And then, outside of the apps that you most likely have on your computer, we also integrate with McAfee host DLP. We will be expanding to their EPO and other technologies as well. But what this essentially means is, in real time, as soon as a file is created that contains intellectual property, it can be blocked from being copied to a USB drive. And no one has to have any manual involvement in that process. The big question we have for you guys, and we'd love the feedback, is who do you want to see us integrate with? This is, as I said, an open architecture. It's a very easy process. The process we went down with McAfee was unbelievably fast. It took us a month to get this in customers' hands, and that is extremely fast for an organization the size of a McAfee and someone like Identity Finder partnering together. So we're very excited about these initiatives, and there's a lot more companies out there that we're working with. We'd love to hear from you guys. Let us know who you want to see Sensitive Data Manager integrate with. There's probably other DLP technologies, maybe encryption providers, maybe user behavior monitoring products. You let us know. So let me tie it all together. Sensitive Data Manager, the complete solution to sensitive data management. Discover, classify, monitor, protect. Our big differentiators, the reason customers come to us, are unparalleled accuracy and near zero false positive rate with finding sensitive data. The classification piece that is automated, doesn't require manual intervention, helps increase that awareness. The monitoring so that you have that lower cost of ownership, narrow that window of risk, and get all of your data classified literally instantaneously. And then, of course, the protection. Now we are working with other companies to ensure that you have a way to protect your data after it's been classified, so that if your end game is, I don't want it leaving my organization, I don't want it being posted to the cloud, I don't want it unencrypted, you have that ability to do those things. So for those of you who already have our product, maybe you bought it when it was called Identity Finder, maybe you bought it when it was called Data Discovery, maybe you bought it when it was called Enterprise DLP. We call those the pre-SDM products at this point. Why upgrade to Sensitive Data Manager? The first thing is, we don't know which modules you've owned in the past, but as you can see on the chart on the left, there's been a lot that we've sort of created over time piecemeal. We began with Discovery and some of the remediation, but we then added console, then we added database searching and exchange searching, and then website searching, and then SharePoint searching, and then OCR image searching. I should say image searching via OCR, but SDM includes all of that, and it's future-proofed. You get all of that with SDM going forward. It's module free. Everything's included going forward. In addition, there are components that we can't integrate into the older SKU, and that is specifically around real-time data monitoring, automated file classification, remote cloud searching, which we now do. We can remotely search data that your employees store in Dropbox or Box, and we're constantly adding new cloud providers like Microsoft and Google and Amazon. Again, we want to hear from you. Who else would you want us to add? Do you want us to add Simplicity? Do you want us to add others? Let us know. And then, of course, the user-driven file classification if you choose to make that available to your employees. Sensitive Data Engine is brand new for 9.x. We're on 9.1 now. This was introduced into 9.0. We talked through that in an earlier slide. Additionally, workflow enhancements that allow you to automate remediation. So, for example, if an employee in a certain Active Directory OU has a file that contains credit card numbers, maybe it'll be automatically encrypted, right? Define what these workflows are, but the nice thing is you can automate these processes now. Maybe it's to kick off your McAfee encryption product to automatically encrypt it. Maybe it's to kick off some sort of reporting engine. You have a lot of control over these workflow enhancements. And again, we've created the open architecture to work with third parties. The metadata search by popular demand from our customers, so that we can now search within the metadata of files. Perhaps you have proprietary applications, or you have processes where metadata actually includes that information that is potentially sensitive. You can now search within that. And then we've rewritten our entire database search. So you have the old products and you bought the database module, or if you have SDM, we've replaced OLEDB. It's still there, but we now have also direct database access. This increases performance and that sort of thing. So I think we'll open it up to questions, but in conclusion, I just want to say before I go to some of the questions, and Gabe, you can take a look to see what's been coming in, I will just end with 30 more seconds of SDM is future-proofed so that you can enjoy the economic and budgetary certainty of knowing you're not going to have to buy additional modules going forward. When we add the next ability to search a cloud space provider using the on-premise app, that will be included for you with SDM if you're on the SDM SKU. Monitoring, we talked about Sensitive Data Watcher, the automated classification, allowing your users to tag files so that you can manually have something blocked. I mentioned the cloud stuff, and then integration with third party. So
we had a couple of questions come in. Actually, we had almost a dozen questions come in. So I'm going to try and get to most of them here, but we have just a few minutes left. So I promise everyone that we will respond via email if we don't get you live. One of the first questions to come in was, can SDM implement, sensitive data management, can it implement custom classification tags?
Yes, it can. You have the ability to define any type of tag that you want. We are essentially allowing you to define that information. So whether it's PCI data or medical record or intellectual property, or if you're a Barnes & Noble, maybe it's Barnes, BN customer. You can define any of the rules that would allow something to be classified, and then you can define what that classification looks like visually and by name, completely customized.
Excellent. Here's a very good question from someone else. So how many different levels of classifications are most of our customers using?
I would say 6, give or take 2, but it really comes down to how large the departmental use is. So you take an organization like a Boeing that has an unbelievably large number of different departments. They're going to have 100 different classifications. But you take, let's say, a higher education institution that has maybe a registrar's office and, of course, a financial unit for student loans, and then, of course, the departments themselves for arts and sciences and accounting and business, and that, they might have 6, right? It's going to be personal information, HR data, maybe student data, etc. But everyone's going to be different, and the product allows you to have multiple classification tags as well as unique single tags.
So another question came in. I think we kind of answered before, but I wanted to make this clear for folks still on the line. The question was, will there be a more technical webcast? And the answer to that is yes. We have a more technical webcast scheduled, I believe, for close to the end of the month. We wanted to have this as an overview for folks to get intimately familiar with the solution itself. For those interested in the nitty-gritty details of the solution, yes, there will be a more technical webcast. Another question, are there any plans for existing support of OS X/Linux with SDM?
Yes, we are constantly innovating new features into Windows, and the most popular features from Windows by customer demand are brought over into the other platforms. So the answer is yes. And sorry, go ahead.
No, just in case that question wasn't clear, because I think I may have read that differently there. I'm not sure, so let me add. First and foremost, we do have support for OS X Linux. Yeah, so SDM does work with that already. But to the point Todd's making, we do continue to improve upon that and build upon it with all of the great features that will usually find themselves in the Windows platform first. But if that question was intended to ask whether or not we support those platforms, because I think that's how I'm reading it, the answer to that question is yes. It's currently supported.
Yes. And if there are specific platform questions like, hey, do you support this flavor of Linux, just let us know and we'll get you that answer.
Great. Another question, so does Sensitive Data Manager run in real time or is it scheduled? I think we kind of answered that, but could you expand on that?
Yeah, it's optional. So you have the ability to do both or one or the other. You can have it run as a service that is constantly running in the background, or you can have it run without a service so that you can just schedule it to search. You can have it even search a remote machine so that if you don't want any software installed on a remote device like a NAS, you can remotely do anything you want agentlessly. So you have complete control. We've seen it all at this point, and we're very flexible in your deployment options.
Great. Just another note, because this question did come in and I probably should have mentioned this at the top of the call. Someone asked whether or not there will be a recording available to share with their colleagues. The answer to that is yes. You will get a link to a recording of this webinar afterwards. You'll also be able to get a copy of the slide deck if you so choose. I'll take one more question and then I'll have to answer everyone's questions via email. So does Sensitive Data Manager have role-based access?
Absolutely. So security is the most important thing to us, obviously, and we have made security the most important thing within the product itself so that you can segregate controls, you can have independent responsibilities, you have the ability to get as granular as you would like and set very specific guidance over who can see what and do what. You are not forced by any stretch of the imagination in having to let someone see more information than you would want them to. So it is unbelievably customizable.
All right. Last question, I promise this time. I'll take this one and then we're going to have to sign off because it's a very good question. Someone asked, does the classification modify the file content affecting something like the MD5, some of the SHA, or only the file system metadata for the files? So it does not affect the SHA or MD5 sum. In fact, the last read access time does not even change. Anything else you want to add to that, Todd?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Excellent. So in the interest of everyone's time, I want to thank you all for joining us today. If you have any more questions, please feel free to email them in. Those of you that did ask questions that we didn't get a chance to answer, I promise you I'll be responding myself via email. So you'll get that either from Todd or I. And we look forward to having you with us again. Also, don't forget, if you're not signed up for our newsletter, we have a number of other educational series which do offer CPE credits, so for those of you looking to participate in our bootcamp series, learn a bit more and earn some CPE credits, make sure you sign up for the newsletter for those. Thanks again, and Todd, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Gabe, and thank you everybody for attending. And if you want to hit us up on Twitter, I'm at Todd Feynman, and Gabe is at Gabriel Gums, and of course Identity Finder is at Identity Finder. We look forward to hearing from you, and we hope you found this valuable. Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks again. Cheers, everyone.